The Patriot Act. Do all of you have personal information that you would not want anyone to know? Would you be upset if your information was being passed around to be analyzed by officials? The Patriot Act was a legislation that was passed after the horrible tragedy of 9/11 in order to help gather information, find, and prevent terrorist attacks. Although the passing of this legislation did seem like a good idea at the time, it honestly did not help with information about terrorists. In fact, the passing of this legislation only caused an uproar within the United States. The Patriot Act is still in effect today, and many would like for this legislation to be repealed. I grew up knowing that everyone has their personal business and should be respected. Once I found out that the government was gathering all our personal information, I wanted to spread the word to unite people by opposing this legislation. With the research I have gathered, I would like to convince you that this legislation should be repealed as it violates our constitutional rights. With the Patriot Act repealed, you will not have to worry about the government having all your personal information. Some information gets leaked out into the public and can become known worldwide if you are a popular celebrity. How would you feel if something embarrassing happened to you that you did not want anybody to know got leaked to the public? The Patriot Act is an invasion of privacy, and by opposing the Patriot Act, we can help stop the government from obtaining and storing all our personal information. I would discuss 3 main points with you. Firstly, I would like to discuss what the Patriot Act is and why it was passed. Secondly, I will discuss why the Patriot Act violates our constitutional rights and civil liberties. Lastly, I will discuss the effects of the Patriot Act in today's time and what information is gathered from you. Let us begin with what the Patriot Act is. The USA Patriot Act was a legislation that was passed by Congress in response to the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, otherwise known as 9/11. This image right here is an image of the 4 main points of the Patriot Act. It was enacted in the wake of an attack. It was passed with little or no public debate. It was patriotic discourse, and it uses data from personal technology. I obtained this picture from ebscohost.com. This bill shifted the powers of the judicial branch to the executive branch. This bill was passed in order to have all information from U.S. citizens to gather knowledge and find out who, where, and when another terrorist attack will commence. This legislation could be much better if it were more regulated and less information was gathered from U.S. citizens. The government monitors all emails, messages, and phone calls from all citizens within the United States. The legislation makes perfect sense in that the government is trying to protect its own citizens. However, does it really need to gather all this information all the time? According to Degwin in the article USA Patriot Act, the bill is supposed to protect the United States from attacks and such, but the government is continuing to gather information from all of us, even when there is no evidence to say that any of us are a terrorist. The Patriot Act was a rushed legislation in that the United States was worried that another attack may happen and they might not know when. The instinct of the government was to allow itself to obtain and gather all information in order to protect America. According to Cole in the article, The War on Civil Liberties, gathering information is the first process in the investigation of anything. However, gathering of information should only happen when there is evidence. Government is violating our constitutional rights and civil liberties that our founding fathers created. Now that you know what the Patriot Act is and why it was passed, I will discuss with you how it violates our rights as United States citizens. The Patriot Act violates some of our constitutional rights. According to McNeil in the article Ships in Policy and Power, the Patriot Act allows for warrantless arrests based on suspicion of an individual. It allows for warrantless searches, which is in violation of our Fourth Amendment within the Constitution. This right here is an image of the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue. Obtain this picture from google.com. Why would the government authorize this type of legislation that violates one of our constitutional rights? The legislation continues to violate other acts, such as the Wiretap Act, which prohibited recording and eavesdropping on private face-to-face telephone and electronic communications. The act contains many parts that allows the government to have information that will help find terrorists at all. According to the article, The Pros and Cons of the NSA's Domestic Surveillance Program, Section 210 allows the government the possession of bank account or credit card numbers of U.S. citizens. Why does our government require this information? How can being in possession of this information prevent a terrorist attack? Section 216 prevents the use of trap and trace devices to help monitor what calls are made, who are making the call, and what phone the call was made to or came from. Do any of you feel comfortable that the government is monitoring your calls? This legislation has even caused a large controversy amongst officials within the government. According to Johnson in the article, Patriot Act Updates Alert for Congress, some congressmen wanted to reform the bill. Time started to expire, and in the end, the ones who wanted to reform the bill ended up voting to extend the program without any reforms whatsoever. This legislation has not even helped prevent school shootings throughout the U.S. If the government passed a legislation to protect us, why has the government not prevented some of these school shootings? According to Tiger and the article, The Twilight of Personal Liberty, the bill destroyed the legal distinction between protected association and criminality and broke the barrier that protected personal privacy. The government continues to believe that this legislation is a good idea, as it even extended it to this year with new sections. Many people still continue to have strikes against the bill to this day. This right here is an image of a female that's having a strike against the Patriot Act. I obtained this picture from ebscohost.com. The continuation of this legislation must be stopped, and I will discuss how it affects you today with these new sections. The Patriot Act was reformed slightly in 2015. The USA Freedom Act restored and renewed some of the parts in the Patriot Act that had expired. Although some parts were renewed, it did not significantly restore balance to our privacy within the United States. The government continues to monitor calls, texts, and emails of all U.S. citizens. According to Johnson in the article, Patriot Act Updates Alert for Congress, the government still monitors information from cell phones. However, the information from phones is retained, and the information can be obtained with permission from a federal court. This reform is much better, but government officials can still obtain information just as easy because of the section that allows warrantless searches for suspicion of terrorist association. Although the government is trying to make the Patriot Act better, it still needs more work. This information gathering continues today in 2019. How would you feel that your bank account information is being passed around throughout the government? How would you feel that some of your calls are being monitored? The government must stop this invasion of privacy upon its U.S. citizens. Together, we can make a difference by standing in unison to either help repeal or better reform this legislation. Our privacy is our privacy, and we must not let the government monitor us who have no association with terrorism. In conclusion, I would like to make some statements. The United States government should not gather all information, especially superfluous information, from its citizens. The government is invading all our privacy, and we must stand together. The Patriot Act was a legislation that was supposed to help prevent further terrorist attacks. We found out that this particular legislation is an invasion of our privacy and violates our constitutional rights. Finally, we talked about how this legislation continues to this day and how it affects us individually and as a whole. By opposing this legislation and coming together in unison, we can help stop or at least reform the Patriot Act to balance our privacy and protect our personal information. Thank you.